Wow, what an interesting conversation that was to kick off the afternoon. For our next session, we will be exploring how generative AI is driving real-world success in enterprises. We're going to discover some really impactful case studies where companies are leveraging Gen AI to tackle some really big challenges, as well as streamline operations and boost revenue. From automating tasks to enhancing customer interactions, we're going to learn how leading businesses are turning their potential into practical outcomes. Let's give a warm welcome to the stage, Andrew Joyner, CEO at Hyperscience, Michiel Scheffer, President of the Board at the European Innovation Council, and last but most definitely not least, Ciara Riordan, social news editor and presenter at BBC News.
Now, thank you so much for coming to this talk. It's going to be amazing because these two men have such experience in enterprise over the last 30-odd years. So the tips we learn from them is going to be incredible. So that's the promise anyway.
No problem.
So Andrew, I'm going to start with you. So you're the CEO of Hyperscience. Can you tell us what Hyperscience does?
Sure. We were founded about 10 years ago. We're a venture-backed startup. We raised about $300 million during that time. And we basically have a mission to bring ML and core AI into the core of the enterprise. And what that means is we develop models that can read documents inside businesses, documents that most of the world externally have not seen. It could be the language of your business, invoices, purchase orders, shipping labels, things that the systems need to read in order to drive downstream automation.
Now, you are working with massive companies and governments in the world. Can you tell us about some of them and what are you doing to help them?
It's unique for startups of our size to be selling to the size enterprises that we sell to. One of our biggest clients is the Veteran Affairs Association, which is one of the largest healthcare providers inside the U.S. that serves all the veterans. But the scale that we operate in is we read over 1 billion documents a year. It's all the medical claims that people who are serving our country have had to submit for claims. Those processes used to take about 3 months to adjudicate, to get reimbursed. Because we've basically automated that, we've taken it down to 3 days. And it's one of those cases where we can show now with AI there's provable ROI. There were about 14,000 keyers who used to key in information all day long related to a claim. But because we can train models to read that information, to plumb into the systems, we can now automate that process, which generates hundreds of millions of dollars of savings. But it's also, the nice part is, behind all those documents, there are human connections. And so they're getting things that are important in their lives back to them more quickly.
Yeah, so you're helping rather than hindering?
We are.
Yeah. So, Michiel, you are the board president of the European Innovation Council. Now, I Googled the European Innovation Council and it brought up a lot. But can you simply tell us, what does the European Innovation Council do?
Well, very simply, we are the venture capital arm of the European Union. So we basically fund deep tech startups with a combination of grants and equity. We are the only VC in the world that provides grants, and we're also the only grant agency providing equity. And we only do deep tech, and we only do deep tech when it really addresses fundamental society issues.
Okay, so can you tell us how much the budget is?
The overall budget, we work with 7-year budgets. We have received from the 27 member states 10 billion euros for 7 years. That will lead to around 1,000 companies we will invest in.
Okay, so for people in the audience who have startups, do they have to be based in the European Union to apply? And then what happens if they want to apply?
Well, simple rule of thumb, yes, you need to be based in the EU, but we also accept, we also have, let's say, beneficiaries or laureates from 4 non-EU countries, Norway, UK, Iceland, Israel. Switzerland is under negotiation, and under some conditions, non-EU countries, but rather thing of low-income countries. So Dominican Republic, yes, US, no.
Okay, and so when people apply, is it a lengthy process? And who are you deciding?
No, I'm not deciding anything. We get about 2,500 proposals a year. So if I would have to read them, I would have 25 minutes per proposal. So I don't do that. Okay. We have experts doing that. We have a process of application in general in stages. So you first submit a brief summary. You first submit a PowerPoint. Then you basically judge against your concepts. If it's okay, you submit a business plan. And if the business plan is seen as okay, scientifically and financially, you go to an interview session. But we only fund 1 in 20 applicants. So it's a very competitive process. And because of that, people experience it as bureaucratic.
Okay.
But the only way to select 60 companies out of 1,200 is bureaucracy, because a lottery of first come, first serve is not ideal either.
No, it's hard. It's
hard. But it's rewarding as well, because we fund, especially for startups, we fund up to 2.5 million grants and up to 15 million equity.
Wow.
So it's a relatively big ticket, not compared to the US. We have a new instrument called STEP, which is more US oriented, which is up to 30 million euro equity. But it's, if you win big.
Okay, yeah, it sounds great. I think everybody needs to apply. Andrew, so for the people who don't get this funding, you have a huge amount of experience in funding from not just Hyperscience, but from before then. So can you give tips to startups about, how to get funding, what's the best way, what tips do they need?
Yeah, look, one of the fortunate things I've had in my career is I've done all of them. I've done angel funding, I've done venture capital funding, private capital companies, and then we've been acquired by public companies. There are vast pools of capital that are out there, but your story has to map to the maturity and essentially the thesis of each of those individual funds. And I think Michiel pointed out something really important, which is typically you have to solve a fundamental problem. You need to have a fundamental piece of IT at your core, because as you expand across markets and have to generate revenue, it has to be some type of resonance. Ultimately, as you progress through stages, I typically take over companies after a technical founding and there's a market fit. And so the next stage is you have to be able to generate revenue. You have to be able to generate customers. That's a complex endeavor to sustain revenue growth, because ultimately that's what will sustain the valuations that the investors are believing in early stages, is that ultimately that market fit is going to translate into revenue. So you can tap into those pools as long as you continue to have the success and essentially the revenue accumulation behind the idea.
Okay. Michiel, in terms of examples of startups that you have funded that are doing well, can you tell us about them?
Well, since the panel is on AI, partly, one example is we fund a company called Accelera, and Accelera is developing hardware, so basically chips for AI. So that's one interesting example. And that's also a company with a big ticket request. So we put in 50 million, but that's not all. It goes on. The other one, we have a large portfolio of AI-oriented companies that basically they build foundation models in health, or they apply AI to highly complex medical conditions, where the founders have medical knowledge. So basically they do imaging of tumors in the colon or in breasts of women or in the lungs, and they understand the fundamental phenomena. So that's quite important for us. We have a health AI funding line and a generative AI one, and we really want companies that understand the fundamentals of the problems they're addressing. Coming with correlations is not good enough, and building on other ones' foundation models is not good enough either. So please be aware of that, and don't apply if you have to be too creative to think to fit into the conditions.
Have you given money to a startup and you were very, very hopeful that it was going to work, and then at some point say to them, we can't continue giving you money?
Well, we have now a portfolio of 635 companies, so it's quite substantial. AI is probably about 10% of that, although a lot of companies also use AI to understand polymerization processes or protein generation, so it's a bit larger. Of those, we have already invested 1 billion euro in 250 companies, but we have rejected about 40 companies that were basically not good enough to put equity into it. So they got a grant, but they didn't get the equity because they were either they had no lead investor, or the technology was scaled down to something less ambitious. And we said, well, then go to the market, but you don't need us.
Okay.
Yeah. And we had some crooks.
And you say that again?
We had some crooks.
Okay.
For all the.
Okay.
So we do a thorough due diligence, a KYC. That's important. You say you need to know your customer. And I see too many SaaS companies around here who basically think, oh, SaaS is safe because I don't have to meet the customer. No, you have to understand the customer. Talk with them. SaaS is the only technique of distribution.
Yeah. Andrew, so everything we're talking about is quite positive, but there are challenges around Gen AI in business. So what do you see are the challenges that you've encountered from your experience, but also in the future? Big question, I know.
It's the saying, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think looking at the world of a lens that AI is just generative is part fallacy. The information, the way we had to solve our problem, generative was not necessarily the answer. ML was the answer, but we had to approach it very differently. And so we had to train specialized models that we knew data scientists would be scarce resources. And so the number of hurdles that we went through to solve, which is why we raised the money we did, number one, we had to train models in handwriting. We had to train models because the things that are in back offices are very messy. So we had to go find that type of information to build up the initial corpus so that anytime we went into a company, we didn't have to spend time training models to read signatures and so forth. We then knew data scientists would be scarce. So it's not you can go into a company and then hire the data scientist or give the data scientist time to build models. So we built an application that allows someone in as few as 20 to 30 documents to build their own model. And then we have to run in air-gapped environments. So we may not be disconnected to or may not be connected to the cloud. And I think that generative AI, much of what we experience, is all connected to the cloud. But inside enterprises, you may be in a vehicle, you may be on a battleship. You need to run in theaters where you may not be connected. And so all of these are big engineering challenges that have to be solved because all of your information just can't be placed potentially in the cloud for generalized consumption.
Yeah. And what do you think, Michiel, what do you think are the challenges that you see coming and in the past as well?
Well, one important challenge is that you need to understand the data, because I'm a statistician by training, and if you have a wrong database or a database with, let's say, too many errors, if you put it in AI, you get a garbage in, garbage out mechanism. We're also quite critical on using publicly available texts and publicly available images, because text and images are also representation. So what is quite important for us is that you have an access and a deep understanding of the fundamental primary database. And so, for example, we had a company coming to us that were able to make diagnostics of breast cancer based on population data. Yeah, the number of false negatives and false positives is far too high. And a Dutch hospital will say, yeah, it's no use. We share all the 15 hospitals our data, so we don't need AI because we have the primary databases. And so be conscious of the social context in which you use data. And very often you will have a lot of efforts to program your AI in order to clean up, let's say, the false data streams.
Yeah. Andrew, so did you say it cost 300 million to get Hyperscience going, basically?
We did. We raised that amount of money because the technical challenges that we needed to solve were quite complex. Okay. So we've trained some of the largest models in the world on business-critical information. It's expensive to build models, and sometimes that's underestimated. And I think Michiel makes a great point, which is you have to understand your use of data. And a lot of customers are not comfortable, especially if we're in the healthcare area, letting that type of information be contributed. And so we had to build pipelines to either synthetically create data so that we weren't using any private information. All of those technical hurdles increase the engineering needs. But then, as I think Michiel, he said a great point, which is you have to know your customers. So you cannot be a technology in search of a problem. Yeah. And we knew very, very quickly what problems we were trying to solve. And so the next set of money is essentially arm your team to go out and have those intimate conversations with customers and solve a real problem that they're willing to pay you for.
So startups who don't have a lot of money, they're obviously trying to get money, but it's a costly business, isn't it? Like, you know, what can they do? You know, obviously Hyperscience is a success story. It had 300 million. You've a budget of 10 billion over 7 years. You know, that's a lot of money, obviously, but to encourage startups who don't have a lot of money.
My feeling is the dynamics never change. So the two companies earlier, I was acquired by HP. We had 340,000 people, 140 billion in revenue. You'd think there's finally money and people around, and you would go around the company, and it's still the scarce problem. No one has enough time, no one has incremental budget, no one has enough resources. So the problems that entrepreneurs solve today, even if they're a small startup, those are the types of things you've got to overcome, regardless of the size of your business. Those will continually be the challenges. You will never have enough time, you will never have enough resources, you'll never have the budgets. That's why even large companies still need entrepreneurs. They're gifted. That's what's unique. And I think that's why you also look for the soft intangibles in entrepreneurs. So are they willing to essentially put in the grit and to solve those challenges when not everything's lined up for them early?
And Michiel, yeah, do you agree with that?
Well, what is very important with us is we always fund teams. So if you come to the jury stage, you have to come with 3 people. If you come with less than 3, you have already basically a minus point. And the ideal team is we also want to promote women in entrepreneurship. So the ideal team is at least 1, but preferably 2 women or 3 women. What I see with the winners, 1 of the 3 is always competent on the area. So it's a medical doctor or an industrial engineering issue. And yes, there is also a computer nerd and a CEO, but you have, let's say, the balance. If we have 3 nerds, they will not be funded. They have to understand the matter, and since we are going to give up to 15 million euros, we want to be sure that there's a CFO that knows how to plan over years such an investment, and also knows which next steps have to be taken. So that makes it quite complicated as well.
Okay, and final question. What are you looking for from startups who are applying for the next round? Any tips for the people in the audience?
Well, we work with an open program with challenges. So we have 2 challenges for next year. One is on foundational models for medical imaging AI, because now we have breast cancer and colorectal cancer and lung cancer, but a lot of variables are the same. So we want to foster companies in that area. And there's a report written by a gentleman called Draghi. We also look very much to AI that enables productivity increases in industrial processes.
Okay, and what about applicants that are written by chat, the AI program? Do you ever get people applying that haven't done their application themselves?
Well, that's also important. The startups who apply with us are not really startups.
Okay.
I'd say often they have already 3 to 5 years of experience. They have done a seed round, so they come from us for the 17.5 million euros. So that's also a level of maturity required. And a lot of countries have pavilions here as well, the Austrians, for example, and the member states of the EU often provide the smaller grants. So you first go through national funding, and then you move up to the European one, also because we give a lot of services of reaching out to clients in other possible countries. We know all the governments, so we can also bring into contact with public procurement in France, which is a big country. And so we offer a whole range of services, more than only funding.
Okay, I have to end it. Our time is up. But thank you so much. Andrew Joyner, CEO of Hyperscience, and Michiel Scheffer, European Innovation Council Board President. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for coming.